I recently heard a story about a man who decided for Lent he was going to give up sweets, and he was really struggling with it. And as he was driving to work one day, he said, "Okay, Lord, if you don't want me to have a donut this morning, then make it so that there are no open parking spaces in the donut shop that I pass on the way to work." Well, it just so happened that as he drove by, there were open parking spaces. So he just saw it as essentially an open door from the Lord to say, yes, you can go ahead and go in and have a donut. And I hope it's no surprise that that's not really how God works. And so I wanted to preface that with, as we head into the reading for today. This reading comes from James 1, and I'm going to start reading in verse 13. "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death." Now, this passage is not necessarily the most encouraging passage we've shared on Read and Reflect, but it's an important one. And the reason why is because it reminds us of the source of sin, the power of sin, and the path that sin takes. I think it's important to see here that just like the guy that I mentioned in the story at the beginning, laying something out there and saying, "God, if you don't want me to do this awful thing, then do this, this, and this." The temptation was already there. And I love how in this passage it says that each person is tempted. We all face temptation. And then it says they are dragged away by their own evil desire, and they're enticed by it. You see, God has given us his Spirit to speak truth into us and to remind us and to give us direction, but we still have this sinful nature that we need to take control over, that we need to stand up against. And he helps us, and he gives us the way out, as Scripture tells us, that even though we all face temptation, God will give us a way out. But we need to be ready and to be listening for that way out. Sin isn't something that creeps up. I mean, it can creep up on us, but it's not something that comes out of nowhere that we don't see coming. It starts with just that little bit of temptation, that desire, that ache to do something that we know we shouldn't, but it's there. And then God has given all of us a choice. What are we going to choose? Are we going to choose to follow that desire, that sinful nature? And as it says, after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And then sin, when it's in full growth, it gives birth to death. And this isn't like the actual physical death. It's spiritual death. It's the separation of us from God. When we let ourselves be dragged away and carried away by the desires and the sinful desires that we have, instead of sitting in God's will and allowing him and the Spirit of God to live out in us, we can be drug away by our sin, by our sinful nature, and be drug away from our connection with and our relationship with God. So the important message from these 2 or 3 verses is temptation is never going to go away completely. It's always going to be there. But what are we going to do in response? Are we going to allow sin to take the full path, to drag us away? Or are we going to constantly be realigning and rededicating ourselves to following the Spirit of God and his will and his desire for our life? It takes a moment by moment, minute to minute, day by day dedication of our lives to the will of God. I hope that you look over these verses again and just ask yourself, are you submitting to God, or are you submitting to your sinful nature?